My name doesn't really matter right now. What matters is that for years, I lived in a house where love turned into fear. My husband, the man I promised to share my life with, hit me. Not once, not twice, but so many times that I lost count. When people hear that, the first question is always, why didn't you just leave? And I get it. It seems so simple from the outside. But when you're in it, it's not simple at all. I stayed because I thought he'd change. I stayed because he'd cry after hurting me and tell me he was sorry. I stayed because I didn't want to break my family apart. And honestly, I stayed because I was scared. Scared of what he'd do if I tried to leave. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was just stress. He had a rough day at work. He didn't mean it. I pushed him too far. I came up with every excuse you can imagine. And when he bought me flowers the next day, I convinced myself that maybe it wasn't that bad. But the truth is, it got worse. It always does. At first, I thought I could control it. Like if I just kept the house a little cleaner, or stayed quiet when he was in a bad mood, or dressed the way he liked, then maybe he wouldn't snap. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I started living in survival mode, planning outfits that would cover bruises, avoiding family gatherings so no one would notice, smiling in photos when deep down I felt empty. I learned how to lie without even thinking about it. The hardest part wasn't even the pain. It was pretending everything was normal, going to work, going to church, saying I'm fine when people asked. Nobody knew. And I wanted to keep it that way because the shame was heavier than the bruises. For years I told myself I could handle it. That leaving wasn't an option. And then one day, everything changed. It wasn't some big dramatic moment like in the movies. It was actually really quiet. My daughter, who was just 3 at the time, saw him push me. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked. And the look on her face, it broke me. Because I realized she was watching. She was learning from me. If I stayed, I was teaching her that this is what marriage looks like. That this is what love looks like. And I couldn't let her grow up believing that. That's when I decided I had to fight back. Not with my fists, but with a plan. I started saving small amounts of money. I reached out to someone I trusted. I told myself, this isn't just about me anymore. Leaving wasn't easy. It was messy and scary. I doubted myself 100 times, but I finally walked away. And here's the part I didn't expect. Leaving him wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. Because once I got out, I didn't just start to heal. I started to help other women who were going through the same thing. I thought my story was only about pain, but it became about survival, about strength, and about realizing I wasn't alone. And that's what I want to share with you today. This is not a story full of perfect answers. It's a story of mistakes, fear, courage, and small steps that turned into big changes. If you're listening, maybe you've been through something like this. Or maybe you know someone who has. Either way, I want you to know you're not crazy, you're not weak, and you're not alone. So let me take you back to where it all started. I still remember the first time like it was yesterday. We had been married for just 6 months. The wedding pictures were still hanging on the wall. My dress was carefully packed away in a box in the closet. To the outside world, we were still the picture-perfect newlyweds. It was a Tuesday night. Nothing special about it. I had cooked dinner, chicken and mashed potatoes, his favorite. But I had forgotten to buy the exact brand of gravy he liked. That's all it took. One small thing. At first, it was just his tone. Sharp. Critical. How hard is it to remember something so simple? Then it was the way he pushed his chair back so fast it scraped across the floor. And then, his hand. Across my face. I was so stunned I didn't even react. I remember the sound more than the pain. The slap echoed in my ears, like it didn't belong in my house, in my life, in my marriage. My cheek burned, but what hurt more was the shock. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. Not to us. He froze right after, like even he couldn't believe what he had just done. Then came the apologies, the tears, the begging. He held me and said, "I don't know what came over me. It'll never happen again. Please forgive me." And I did. Because I wanted to believe him. Because it was easier to pretend it was a one-time thing than to admit that maybe I had just stepped into something much darker than I realized. That night, he brought me flowers from the gas station. He kissed my forehead. He told me he loved me more than anything, and I convinced myself it was over. But it wasn't. The second time came just weeks later, and the third followed soon after. It was like once that line was crossed, it became easier for him to cross it again. And I changed too. I went from shocked to making excuses, from crying to going silent. I stopped telling my mom about the little fights. I stopped seeing my friends as much. I didn't want anyone to notice. I didn't want anyone to ask questions. Because how could I explain it? How could I say out loud that the man I married, the man who promised to love me, honor me, and protect me, was the same man who shoved me into walls, who grabbed my wrists so tight they left bruises, who could go from sweet to terrifying in the blink of an eye? And deep down, I blame myself. I thought maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I shouldn't push his buttons. Maybe if I just tried harder, he wouldn't get so angry. That's what he told me after all. If you just listened, if you just respected me, if you just knew when to shut up. I started to believe him. That's how it happens. It doesn't start with black eyes. It starts with words, criticism, little digs, control over what you wear, who you see, how you spend money. And then slowly, it turns physical, until you don't even realize how far you've fallen. I remember one time I was getting ready for church, and I put on a dress he didn't like. "Too short," he said. He ripped it right there, tore the fabric so I couldn't wear it again. I laughed it off when people asked why I wasn't dressed up that Sunday. Oh, clumsy me. I ruined my dress. But inside, I was dying. The scariest part wasn't the violence itself. It was how normal it started to feel. How I woke up every day wondering what version of him I was going to get. The loving husband? Or the man whose anger could fill a room like smoke, choking the air until I couldn't breathe? And I'll be honest with you, I loved him. That's what made it so hard. He wasn't always a monster. Sometimes he was gentle. Sometimes he'd look at me like I was the only person in the world. Sometimes he'd talk about our future. Kids, vacations, growing old together. And in those moments, I clung to the hope that maybe the good side of him would win. But the truth was, the violence was winning. I started hiding things. Makeup in every purse so I could cover a bruise at work. Scarves even in the summer. Excuses ready at all times. I became an actress in my own life, always performing, always pretending. I told myself, this is marriage. Everyone has problems. Nobody's perfect. But in the quiet moments, when I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew this wasn't normal. I knew deep down that love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. The first time he hit me was the day my marriage truly ended. It just took me years to accept it. After that first time, something inside me broke. But not in the way you'd expect. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't run. I didn't call the police. I just went quiet. Silence became my survival tool. I learned to measure my words, like I was walking on a tightrope every single day. I studied his moods the way some people study for exams. Was he tapping his foot? Was his jaw tight? Did his voice have that edge? If so, I knew I had to stay small, keep the peace, disappear inside myself until the storm passed. I became two different people. On the outside, I was the sweet wife who smiled at neighbors, who brought brownies to church potlucks, who posted happy photos on Facebook. But on the inside, I was a shadow. Always tense, always calculating, always waiting for the next explosion. You wouldn't have recognized me if you knew the girl I was before. I used to be confident. I used to laugh so loud my friends told me to quiet down. I used to sing in the car with the windows rolled down, not caring who heard. But that version of me slowly disappeared. Instead, I became cautious, nervous, apologetic. I apologized for everything. Burning the toast, being late, talking too much, breathing too loud. I apologized so much that sometimes I'd hear myself say, "I'm sorry," without even knowing what I was apologizing for. I thought if I was perfect enough, quiet enough, maybe he wouldn't hurt me. But perfection doesn't stop abuse. It only feeds it. And the lonelier I got, the harder it became to reach out. At first, I wanted to tell someone, my mom, my best friend, anyone. But then I imagined their faces, their questions. Why don't you just leave? Are you sure you're not exaggerating? So I stayed quiet. Because silence felt safer than being judged. Or worse, not being believed. That silence changed me. It taught me how to keep secrets, how to smile through pain, how to laugh when I wanted to cry. But it also stole pieces of me. Little by little, I lost my voice, my confidence, my joy. I became a stranger to myself. There were moments, though, tiny cracks in the silence, when I caught glimpses of who I used to be. Like when my daughter giggled and I laughed without thinking, only to stop myself, afraid he'd say I was being too loud. Or when I looked at old photos and barely recognized the girl in them. She looked free, carefree, alive, and I wondered if I'd ever feel that way again. But then the fear would come back. You see, living with abuse is like living in a house with invisible tripwires. You never know which step will set off the explosion. Maybe it's dinner being too cold. Maybe it's a look you gave without realizing. Maybe it's just that he had a bad day at work. So you live in constant alert mode. Your body never relaxes. Your mind never rests. And over time, that changes who you are at your core. I remember one night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and realizing I hadn't taken a deep breath all day. Not one. I had been holding my breath from the moment I woke up, bracing for impact. That's what silence does. It traps you inside yourself. And yet, the strangest part is how normal it starts to feel. You convince yourself this is just life, that maybe everyone has secrets like this, that maybe you're the problem, and if you just do better, things will get better. I clung to that hope for years. Every time he promised to change, I believed him. Every time he cried, I told myself he must really love me. Every time he bought me flowers, I thought, see? He's not all bad. That hope is what kept me in silence. But the truth was, the longer I stayed quiet, the more I disappeared. My laugh, my confidence, my dreams, even the way I carried myself. I went from standing tall to hunching my shoulders, as if I could make myself smaller, less noticeable. And in the middle of all that silence, I became angry. Not at him at first, at myself, for not being stronger, for not leaving, for letting it happen again and again. That anger was quiet too, but it was there. It sat in my chest, heavy, like a stone. I didn't know it then, but that anger was the beginning of something. It was a spark. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely gone, that some small part of me still wanted to fight back. But before I could get there, I had to survive more years of silence, more nights of pretending, more mornings of covering bruises. That silence nearly destroyed me, but it also prepared me, because when the day finally came for me to fight back, I had years of quiet strength built up inside me, strength I didn't even know I had. If silence was my shield, fear was the chain that kept me locked in place. Fear controlled every single part of my life. It wasn't just fear of the bruises or the yelling, it was fear of the unknown. I used to think fear was just about being scared in the moment, like when a car almost hits you, or when you hear a loud noise in the dark. But living with him taught me that fear can move in. It can take over your entire house, your thoughts, your body, your future. It becomes the air you breathe. I was afraid of him, yes, but I was also afraid of what would happen if I left. Where would I go? How would I pay the bills? What if he found me? What if he hurt my family? He used to say things like, "If you ever leave me, you'll regret it. Nobody else will want you. You're nothing without me." And after hearing that enough times, I started to believe it. That fear seeped into the smallest parts of my day. When I was driving home from work, my stomach would twist in knots as I pulled into the driveway, not knowing which version of him was waiting for me. Was it the calm one who'd kiss my cheek, or the angry one who'd look for a reason to explode? I remember once, sitting in my car outside the house, just gripping the steering wheel, unable to go inside. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, my heart racing, because I knew if I walked through that door at the wrong time, I'd pay for it. But I couldn't sit there forever. Eventually, I had to go in. That's what fear does. It traps you in situations that feel impossible to escape. Even simple things like grocery shopping carried fear. If I forgot something he wanted, there'd be consequences. If I spent too much, he'd throw the receipt in my face. Once I bought the wrong brand of cereal, and he shoved the box across the kitchen so hard it exploded on the floor. My daughter started crying, and I just stood there frozen, too scared to move. But the worst fear wasn't about the next slap or the next shove. It was about being exposed, about people finding out. I was terrified someone at work would notice the bruise I didn't cover properly, or that a neighbor would overhear the yelling. I thought if anyone knew, they'd judge me. Or worse, they'd force me to make a choice I wasn't ready to make. So I hid behind that fear. I let it tell me what I could and couldn't do. I didn't visit friends. I didn't call my family as much. I didn't join activities or groups I would have loved, because all of that would risk him getting angry. And let me tell you, fear makes you smaller. Not just in your body, but in your mind. You stop dreaming about the future because you're too busy surviving the present. I used to have goals. I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to travel. But when you're living in fear, all of that disappears. Your only goal becomes, just make it through today. One night, though, the fear turned into something else. I woke up to him yelling, accusing me of things I didn't do. He pushed me out of bed, and I hit the floor so hard my shoulder ached for weeks. And as I lay there, I looked up at him towering over me, and this thought crossed my mind. He could kill me. Right here. Right now. And nobody would know. That was the moment the fear shifted. It was no longer just about bruises or yelling. It was about survival. Real survival. I realized that if I stayed, one day I might not wake up. And yet, even with that realization, I didn't leave right away. That's the part people don't understand. Fear doesn't just hold you back. It convinces you that leaving could be even worse. What if he hunted me down? What if he hurt my daughter? What if nobody believed me? What if I really was nothing without him, like he said? Those questions played in my head like a broken record. Fear whispered in my ear constantly, keeping me trapped in a life that was killing me slowly. But here's what I didn't know at the time. Fear can also be fuel. The same fear that kept me small also planted a seed in me, a seed that one day would grow into the courage I needed. I wasn't there yet. At that point, fear still owned me. But the shift had started. I started imagining small escapes in my head. Daydreams, really. Packing a bag, driving away, starting over somewhere nobody knew me. At first, it was just fantasy. But over time, those daydreams became plans. Quiet plans, secret plans. Fear kept me from moving for a long time. But eventually, fear was the thing that pushed me to move. Because I realized I wasn't just scared of him. I was scared of what would happen to my daughter if I didn't leave. And that fear was stronger than the fear of him. There's always a moment, a line you cross where something inside you says, enough. For years, I thought that moment would never come for me. I thought I'd just keep living the same way, quiet, afraid, pretending. But it did come, and it came in the most unexpected way. It wasn't the worst beating. It wasn't even the loudest fight. It was a small moment, but it cracked everything open. I was in the kitchen, making lunch. My daughter was 3 years old at the time. She was sitting at the table, coloring, her little legs swinging back and forth, humming a tune only kids know how to make up. It was peaceful for once. Then he walked in. I don't even remember what set him off that day. Maybe I forgot to do the laundry. Maybe I said something in the wrong tone. Honestly, it didn't matter. With him, anything could turn into a reason. He grabbed me by the arm and shoved me against the counter so hard I knocked over a glass. It shattered on the floor, and before I could react, his hand came down across my face. The pain burned, but that wasn't what got me. What got me was the silence that followed. I turned my head and saw her, my daughter, sitting at the table, holding her crayon in midair, just staring. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was just watching. And in her eyes, I saw it. She was learning. She was learning what a husband is supposed to look like, what marriage looks like, what love looks like. She was learning that a man has the right to hurt a woman when he's angry, and that a woman's job is to stay quiet and take it. That's when something inside me snapped. I don't mean I suddenly became fearless. I was still terrified. My heart was pounding. My body shook. But for the first time, my fear wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her. I thought, if I stay, she's going to think this is normal. She's going to grow up and marry someone just like him. She's going to believe this is what love feels like. And I couldn't let that happen. That night, when he was asleep, I went into her room and sat by her bed. I watched her breathe, her little chest rising and falling, her tiny hand clutching her stuffed bear. And I made a promise, to her and to myself. I whispered, "This ends with me." It didn't mean I left the next morning. I wish it were that simple. But what changed was my mindset. I stopped thinking about how to survive each day, and I started thinking about how to get out. I began to plan quietly. I started setting aside small amounts of cash whenever I could. I memorized the phone numbers of shelters and hotlines. I began reaching out to a friend I trusted, just testing the waters, seeing if she'd believe me. She did. And she told me, "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." It gave me hope. Of course, he noticed something was different. Abusers always do. He accused me of being distant, of not loving him enough. And sometimes the violence got worse. But now I carried a secret he didn't know. I was done. I wasn't going to stay forever. The breaking point wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. It was me standing in the kitchen, looking at my daughter's face, and realizing she deserved better. That I deserved better. It's strange how one moment can change everything. For years, I thought the bruises were my breaking point. The fear, the pain. But it wasn't. It was that look on her face. That silent little witness who reminded me that my life wasn't just mine. And once that switch flipped inside me, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't go back to pretending. The next weeks were tense. I went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, pretending, but inside, I was preparing. Every bruise, every shove, every cruel word became fuel. Instead of breaking me, they built my determination. I knew leaving would be dangerous. I knew it could get worse before it got better, but I also knew I had to try. Because staying wasn't just killing me, it was teaching my daughter how to die inside too. That realization was the beginning of my fight. Once I made up my mind that I couldn't stay forever, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. And let me tell you, planning in secret while living with someone who controls your every move is one of the hardest things you can do. I couldn't just pack a bag and run out the door. He would have found me. He would have dragged me back. So I had to be smart, careful, quiet. The first thing I did was start saving money. Not much, just a few dollars at a time. If I bought groceries and got change back, I'd tuck a couple of bills into a small envelope I hid inside an old shoebox under my side of the bed. I knew he almost never looked there. Over months, that envelope slowly grew thicker. Not enough to start a whole new life, but enough to at least get me and my daughter somewhere safe if we had to leave fast. Next, I memorized phone numbers. I couldn't risk writing them down in case he found them. I practiced repeating them in my head like a song. My friend's number, the hotline for a women's shelter, even the local police. I wanted to be ready, because I knew when the moment came, I wouldn't have time to think. I also started watching him differently, not just out of fear, but with strategy. When was he gone the longest? What days was his temper the worst? What habits could I use to my advantage? It sounds strange, but it became like a secret game in my head, one that might save our lives. The hardest part, though, was pretending. Pretending I was still the same. Pretending I wasn't planning my way out. Smiling when he made a joke. Laughing at the right times. Cooking his favorite meals. Acting like nothing was different, even though everything inside me had changed. There were days I doubted myself. Days I thought, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I should just stay. But then I'd look at my daughter, and every bruise, every insult, every broken piece of me reminded me that staying wasn't an option anymore. One night, after he had fallen asleep, I crept into my daughter's room and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." She was too little to understand, but saying the words out loud gave me strength. It felt like a secret vow between us. I confided in one friend during this time. Just one. I was terrified of anyone else finding out, but I knew I needed at least one person in my corner. She didn't judge me. She didn't say, "Why haven't you left yet?" She just said, "When you're ready, I'll help." And those words were like oxygen to me. The plan wasn't perfect. Honestly, it was barely a plan at all. It was scraps, some hidden money, a few memorized numbers, one friend I trusted. But it was more than I'd ever had before. And it gave me hope. Of course, living in that house while carrying this secret was terrifying. He started to sense something. Abusers always do. He'd ask, "Why are you so quiet lately? Why are you acting different?" I'd laugh it off, tell him I was just tired. But inside, I was terrified he'd find out. One evening, he almost did. He went digging through my things and found the shoebox. My heart stopped. He opened it, saw the envelope. Luckily, I had left just a few bills in it that week, so it didn't look suspicious. I told him it was grocery money, just a little stash so I wouldn't have to keep asking him for cash. He stared at me for what felt like forever, then tossed it back like he didn't care. But I cared. I thought my plan was over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I held my daughter tight, wondering if I'd ever really get us out. But something in me wouldn't let go. I wasn't giving up. Every close call only made me more determined. I began imagining the day we'd finally leave. I pictured us walking out the door, getting in the car, never looking back. Sometimes those daydreams were the only thing that kept me going. The plan grew in pieces, but the truth is, you can never plan enough for something like this. There's no perfect moment. There's no neat way to escape. You just prepare as much as you can, and then you wait. You wait for the day when fear and courage collide, and you're forced to act. For me, that day was closer than I realized. At the time, I thought I was just collecting scraps of hope, building little steps toward freedom. But in reality, I was preparing for the fight of my life. And when it came, all those small steps, the money, the numbers, the promise I made to my daughter, would matter more than I ever knew. I'll never forget that night. It's burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. It started like so many others, an argument over something small, something meaningless. That's how it always began. I had forgotten to fold the laundry the way he liked. That was it. Just that. But that night, his anger was different. It was sharper, more dangerous. I could feel it in the way he moved, in the way his eyes looked right through me. My stomach dropped. I knew something bad was coming. He started yelling, pacing back and forth. I stood there, silent, hoping my quiet would calm him down. It didn't. He shoved me against the wall so hard my shoulder cracked against the drywall. Then came the first blow to my stomach. I doubled over, gasping for breath, my knees weak. And then I saw it. My daughter. She had come out of her room, standing in the hallway, clutching her blanket. Her little eyes wide, her lip trembling. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't thinking about myself anymore. I wasn't thinking about fear or survival or what would happen next. All I knew was that I couldn't let her see this again. I couldn't let her believe this was what love looked like. When he raised his hand again, something I didn't know I had in me came alive. I grabbed his wrist midair. My hands were shaking, my body weak, but I held on with everything I had. And for the first time, I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Stop. That's enough." He was stunned. I had never done that before. Never fought back. For a second the room froze. His eyes narrowed and he yanked his hand back, furious. But instead of shrinking away, I stood my ground. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst, but I didn't move. "Don't you ever touch me again," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. He laughed at first, mocking me, saying I was weak, saying I'd never leave. But I didn't look away this time. I didn't drop my eyes. I stood there, battered, bruised, terrified. But something had shifted. I wasn't just his victim anymore. I was his resistance. When he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I knew my chance had come. My daughter was still standing there, tears running down her cheeks. I scooped her up, my body aching, and whispered, "It's time." I don't even remember exactly how I moved so quickly. Adrenaline carried me. I grabbed the envelope of money I had hidden. I shoved it into my pocket. I slipped on my shoes, threw a coat over my daughter's pajamas, and walked out the door. Every step down that hallway felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My ears were ringing, my heart racing. I kept expecting him to come after us, to grab me, to pull me back inside. But we made it to the car. My hands shook so hard I could barely put the keys in the ignition. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't even know where I was going. I just drove. My daughter sat in the back seat, silent, clutching her blanket. I could see her little reflection in the rearview mirror, her wide eyes watching me. We ended up at my friend's house, the one I had told my secret to. When she opened the door and saw us, bruised and shaking, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled us inside and locked the door. That night I cried harder than I had in years, not just from the pain, but from the release. For the first time in so long, I wasn't under his roof. For the first time, I felt a flicker of freedom. But let me be honest, it wasn't a clean break. It wasn't like the movies where you leave once and you're done. The days and weeks that followed were messy. There were threats, phone calls, begging, even promises that he'd change. He tried everything to pull me back, and a part of me wanted to believe him. That's the twisted part of abuse. You still love the person who hurts you. You want to believe the good side of them is real. But every time I looked at my daughter, I remembered why I left. That night, when I fought back, I didn't just protect myself. I protected her future. I showed her that her mother wasn't going to stay silent forever, that there was a line, that love doesn't look like fear. And though I was terrified of what came next, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. That night was the beginning of the rest of my life. Leaving was one thing, healing was another. People think that once you walk out the door, everything magically gets better. But the truth is, leaving is just the beginning. The bruises fade, yes, but the wounds inside, those take much longer. The first weeks were chaos. I stayed with my friend, trying to figure out what to do next. I barely slept. Every noise at night made me jump, afraid he had found me. My body was there, but my mind was still stuck in that house. I kept expecting him to walk in, to grab me, to drag me back. My daughter clung to me like glue. She wouldn't let me out of her sight, not even to go to the bathroom. She'd cry if I closed the door. That broke my heart, because I realized she was just as scared as I was. She had seen more than any child ever should. I tried to act strong for her, but inside I felt like I was crumbling. I questioned myself constantly. Had I done the right thing? Was I strong enough to raise her alone? Would he come after us? There were moments I almost gave in to his calls, his promises. He said all the things I used to long to hear. I'll change. I'll go to counseling. I'll never touch you again. And part of me wanted to believe it. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered that night in the kitchen. I remembered my daughter's eyes. That image was burned into me, and it gave me the strength to say no. Still, healing wasn't easy. I carried so much guilt. Guilt for staying as long as I did. Guilt for letting my daughter grow up in that environment. Guilt for not being the strong woman people think you should be. One of the hardest things to admit is that I missed him sometimes. Not the violence, of course, but the good parts. The man who laughed with me, who held my hand at the movies, who whispered, "I love you," before bed. That man was real too, and it confused me, because how could I miss someone who broke me? That's the twisted part of abuse. It leaves you tied to a person you know is bad for you, but who also gave you moments of love. Therapy became a lifeline. At first, I didn't even want to go. I thought, I'm fine. I can handle this on my own. But the truth is, I wasn't fine. I was drowning in silence, guilt, and fear. Sitting in that small office with a stranger asking me to talk about things I had buried for years felt impossible. But slowly, piece by piece, I started to let it out. I learned something important in those sessions. The abuse wasn't my fault. It sounds simple, but it was something I had never fully believed. For years, I thought if I had just done things differently, maybe he wouldn't have hurt me. But the therapist reminded me again and again It wasn't about what I did. It was about him, his choices, his anger, his control. Hearing that over and over started to chip away at the shame I carried. Another step toward healing was connecting with other women who had been through the same thing. At first, I was terrified to join a support group. I didn't want to be that woman, the one people whispered about. But sitting in a room full of women who nodded when I spoke, who didn't judge me, who understood, it was like breathing for the first time in years. They told stories that sounded like mine, different details, same pain. And somehow, sharing the weight made it lighter. But healing wasn't just about therapy or groups. It was about the small things, too. The first time I laughed without forcing it. The first time I cooked dinner and didn't feel nervous about whether it would be good enough. The first time my daughter slept through the night without crying. Those moments were small victories, but to me, they were everything. Of course, there were setbacks, nightmares, panic attacks, days I couldn't get out of bed, times when a slammed door or a raised voice in public made my body shake like I was right back in that house. Healing is never a straight line. It's messy, with ups and downs. But slowly, I started to see pieces of myself come back. The woman who used to sing in the car. The woman who used to laugh too loud. She wasn't gone forever. She was just buried under years of fear. And through it all, I kept talking to myself the way I wish someone had talked to me back then. I'd whisper, "You're safe now. You're strong. You're not alone." At first it felt silly, but over time those words became my truth. The first steps toward healing weren't pretty. They were shaky, fragile, and full of doubt. But they were steps. And every step away from that house, from that life, was a step closer to freedom. And soon, those steps would lead me somewhere I never expected, toward helping others. Healing gave me something I didn't expect, a sense of purpose. For so long, I thought my story was just pain, something I'd always carry but never share. But little by little, I realized that what nearly destroyed me could also be the thing that helped others survive. It started small. One night at the support group, a new woman came in. She sat there quiet, eyes red, hands shaking. I recognized that look. It was the same look I had the first time I walked through those doors. She didn't want to speak, but when she finally did, her voice cracked as she whispered, "I don't know how to leave." And I told her, "I understand. I was you." For the first time, I wasn't the one asking for help. I was the one giving it. I told her about my hidden envelope of money, about memorizing numbers, about the night I finally left. Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Maybe I can do it too." That moment lit something inside me. I began sharing more in the group. Not just my struggles, but my victories. The nights I slept without fear. The mornings I laughed with my daughter. The day I realized I was stronger than I ever knew. And every time I spoke, I saw other women nodding, crying, holding on to hope that if I made it out, maybe they could too. Soon I started volunteering. At first, it was just helping set up chairs, bringing snacks, cleaning up after meetings. But then they asked me to talk to women one-on-one. Women who were still in it, still scared, still unsure. I didn't have all the answers, but I had my story. And sometimes that was enough. I'll never forget one woman in particular. She called me late one night, whispering into the phone that her husband had just left the house after a fight. She didn't know what to do. She was terrified. I sat on the line with her for hours, just talking, reminding her she wasn't alone. Days later, she showed up at a meeting with her kids, bruised, but free. She hugged me and said, "You saved my life." But the truth is, helping her saved me too. Every time I help someone, It gave meaning to what I had gone through. It didn't erase the pain, but it turned it into something more than just suffering. It became a tool, a light in someone else's darkness. Even my daughter became part of that healing. As she grew, I started explaining, little by little, why we left. Age-appropriate truths at first, then more as she was ready to hear it. I told her, love should never hurt. Real love makes you feel safe. I wanted her to know the difference. I wanted her to see that her mom wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter and a survivor. The more I shared my story, the lighter it felt. It wasn't a secret I carried alone anymore. It was a testimony. A reminder that silence only keeps us trapped, but speaking out can set us free. And maybe even set someone else free too. Of course, there are still days when the past comes back. A sudden noise that makes me jump. A memory that sneaks into my dreams. Healing isn't a straight line, and I don't think it ever truly ends. But when those moments come, I remind myself of the women I've sat with, the ones who told me, because of you, I found the courage to leave. That's what keeps me going. Helping others gave me back the power he once stole from me. It reminded me that my story didn't end the night I left that house. It began there. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't just see the woman who was beaten, silenced, and broken. I see the woman who fought back, the woman who walked out, the woman who turned her pain into a purpose. And if sharing my story means that even one more woman finds her strength, then everything I went through has meaning. Because at the end of the day, my survival isn't just mine. It's for every woman who still feels trapped, every child who still watches in silence, every voice that hasn't spoken yet. I found my freedom, and now, helping others find theirs is the most powerful thing I've ever done. When I look back now, it feels like I've lived two different lives. In the first one, I was trapped, silent, scared, broken down piece by piece. In the second, I found my voice, my courage, and eventually, my purpose. It's strange to think that the same hands that once bruised me also pushed me toward becoming who I am today. Not because of him, but in spite of him. For so long, I carried shame like a heavy backpack. Shame for staying. Shame for hiding. Shame for loving someone who hurt me. But over time, I realized that shame didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. The violence, the control, the cruelty. That was his burden, not mine. And that realization set me free. I still have scars, inside and out. Some days, the past creeps in, and I feel that old fear in my chest. But then I remind myself, I'm not that woman anymore. I'm not the one tiptoeing around, waiting for the next explosion. I'm not the one covering bruises with makeup. I'm the woman who walked away. I'm the woman who raised her daughter in safety. I'm the woman who helps others believe they can leave too. My daughter is older now. When I watch her laugh, when I see her running around without fear, when I hear her talk about the kind of love she wants someday, I know it was all worth it. She will grow up knowing the truth, that love should never hurt, that a real partner lifts you up, not tears you down, that respect and safety are not negotiable. And me? I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting it control you anymore. It means using your story as a stepping stone, not a chain. I never wanted to go through what I went through. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I also wouldn't trade the woman I've become. Because she's strong. She's resilient. She's free. If you're listening to me right now, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you're still in it. Maybe you're scared, just like I was. I want you to know this. You are not weak. You are not crazy. And you are not alone. It might not feel like it now, but there is life on the other side of fear. There is freedom. There is laughter. There is peace. And yes, there is love, the real kind. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply whisper to yourself, "This ends with me." That whisper can grow into a plan. That plan can turn into a step. And one step at a time, you can walk out of the darkness and into a new life. My story started with silence, but it didn't end there. It ended with me finding my voice and using it to help others find theirs too. And if my story touched you in any way, subscribe and tell me yours.